Welcome back to the Hyperemesis Scleroderm podcast. I'm your host, Annabella, and today we have an extraordinary guest joining us, Blake, a mom of 4 and a true warrior in the HG community. Blake's journey with HG is nothing short of inspiring. She experienced HG in all 4 of her pregnancies, and her first 2 were especially challenging. Without support from healthcare providers, no medications, no IVs, and little understanding from friends and family, she had to face HG completely on her own. But Blake didn't just survive. She found ways to manage her later pregnancies while also taking care of her growing family. As a mom of 4, she knew firsthand the unique challenges of battling HG while caring for her kids and running a household. Today, Blake is here to share her story and offer hope to other moms going through this. She'll talk about how she managed her later pregnancies differently, the strategies she used to keep her family life running, and how she stayed strong through it all. She's also sharing practical tips for women currently dealing with HG and advice for those considering another pregnancy. Let's dive into Blake's inspiring story. Welcome to the pod, Blake. It's so good to have you here. Could you briefly introduce yourself, who are you, where you're from, and then share your story with Hyperemesis Scleroderm?
Sure. Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad someone like you has started something and I wanted to mention this, when I had hyperemesis gravidarum this last time, I gave birth August 28th of 2024, and I looked for a hyperemesis gravidarum podcast, and I don't think I found one. And I really wanted to find one because I was driving a lot to my appointments, and I was just hoping to find any information that way. And I guess I was really sad to see that there wasn't even one. So I'm glad that someone has taken the gumption to do it.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. For me, it was like similar. I remember I couldn't really like look at any screens. Like my doctors were like, oh, just watch TV or like, just distract yourself when you're nauseous. But like that just didn't work for me. And so I was on Spotify and I couldn't find anything. Um, but yeah, thank you for saying that. Really appreciate
No,
that.
you're right about the screens. And for some reason, driving, maybe it was a little bit of a distraction. So I was able to listen because I started listening to podcasts, and then I thought, well, why not look for a hyperemesis one, and couldn't find one.
Yeah.
But my name is Blake Panzera. I actually have had 4 HG pregnancies. My latest was my son that I had August 28th, 2024. And my first I had October of 2010, my second November 2012, and then my third I had her January of 2015. So I've had 4. And my first one, I was very young. I was still in high school, and I was losing a lot of weight because of the hyperemesis from being so sick. And the doctor at the time, he looked at me and said, well, you should be thankful. A lot of women get fat when they're pregnant, and you have the opposite. So you should be thankful that you're not fat. And I said, is there anything you can do for me for the nausea? And he said, no, there's not. It'll go away. You'll be fine. And every appointment, I would just mention how nauseous I was, and I was losing weight. Every appointment, I was losing at least 5 pounds every appointment, and it was just no big deal. And that was my first pregnancy. She only weighed 5 pounds, 15 ounces. And I know it was because I just couldn't keep anything down. And I was so small. And the family dynamic back then, I wasn't married to my current husband. Um, my family didn't understand that I wasn't exaggerating, that this was serious. Um, because I remember my grandma telling me, well, we've all been through that. You just have to, kind of get over it. And I never did get over it because it wasn't something that you can just forget. It's something that is debilitating. And I think for most women, it's a very mild case of nausea, possibly. And so that's why when they hear someone say, oh, I can't do anything because I'm nauseous, they must be thinking of their own nausea that they experienced and how mild it was. That's my only theory there. But it was hard dealing with my family not understanding. And some of my family did. I had a cousin who I remember I was throwing up. I was gagging. I was about to throw up, and I asked my ex-husband at the time, can you please pull over? And he was like, oh my gosh, don't start. And my cousin was like, you need to pull over. You can't do that. Like, she went through hyperemesis as well. And so she knows, or she knew at the time, that it was serious. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't doing it for attention. It was the last thing I wanted to be dealing with. I didn't want to have no energy. I didn't want to be sick all the time. I wanted to be happy and enjoy my pregnancy like most people do. And I did a very good job of masking it for the most part. But behind closed doors, I was very sick and very miserable. So that was my first pregnancy. My second pregnancy went very similarly, but the difference there was I had a 2-year-old to take care of. Actually, she wasn't even 2 at the beginning of the pregnancy. By the time I had the baby, the second baby, she was 2. And I'm sure you know, a toddler they're a lot of work. And
Yeah.
I'm throwing up and trying to chase a child around. And when you really need to rest is, I believe, the best thing you could do while you have hyperemesis. And I had just had a baby, so my body was probably already depleted. And then I started again having another baby, another pregnancy. And something that people don't talk about a lot, but when you have one baby, you have to entertain that baby. Whereas when you have 2 and 3 kids, they kind of play with each other and entertain each other. And when you have one, they get bored very easily. So I was the entertainment. I was the main caregiver for her while my ex-husband went to work. And it was very isolating again. But that second one, it came in full force. I almost want to say it was more difficult than the first one, although I think with my first one, the one thing that I had that I didn't have the second time was that I was able to sleep in. And my nausea with my first pregnancy was really bad during those morning hours, like morning sickness is what they call it. It was the worst at that time. So what I would do is I would sleep in until 10, 11 o'clock, and that seemed to help. Plus, I was able to get rested. And with my second, there's no way you can sleep in with a toddler. And so I was sleep deprived and awake at all hours of the day, especially in the morning when it seemed to be the worst for me. So that pregnancy also got worse. That doctor actually, I believe he prescribed me some nausea medication, like ondansetron, Zofran.
Yep.
I don't think that helped me very much that pregnancy because I think I was taking the lowest dose, and for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to do much. But that pregnancy also, I towards the end I got a stomach virus. I was actually 20, I think I was around 20 weeks, 22 weeks. I got a terrible stomach virus, and I was so nauseous that I didn't realize I had a stomach virus until I was throwing up and throwing up and throwing up and throwing up. And that wasn't usual for me. It was more usual for me to throw up and then have a break and then, a couple hours later throw up again. It wasn't like constant throwing up and diarrhea. And so I told my grandmother, I have to go to the hospital. I think something's wrong. And so she took the younger baby that I had, and I went to the hospital, and they asked me why I waited so long. And the truth is, now that I look back, is I was so used to throwing up that it took me a while to realize it was a stomach virus and not just throwing up like I always did because of the hyperemesis. So they were able to give me fluids, and I was, again, exhausted. And by the time I got better and they sent me home, I remember asking them if I could stay because I was so exhausted and I just still didn't feel good. And they were like, "No, you're okay now. You're not sick anymore. We have to discharge you." And I felt like I needed a whole nother week in there to just regain my strength. But I had to go back, and my whole family got that virus. It was a really bad one. The neighbors got it. I mean, everyone ended up in the hospital because of it. And so I was lucky that, I was having contractions. I was starting to go into labor, but whatever medicine they gave me through the IV, they were able to stop it. So thankfully that happened. And everything went fine from there. She weighed 6'10", that baby. And within a week of having both of those first two pregnancies, within a week of giving birth, I was able to eat like normal. It improved dramatically right after I gave birth, but then there was still some nausea. Maybe that's from having an epidural or I know they give the hormones that they get, Pitocin. I know they say Pitocin might be part of the reason for that. So it could, who knows why it took so long for me to get rid of the nausea. But it was so nice. I mean, it was like night and day. Once the nausea went away, things tasted the way they were supposed to taste. Smells weren't bothering me like they were. I avoided the kitchen at all costs. I didn't go in the kitchen. I didn't want to go near a sink. Even the smell of Dawn dish detergent nauseated me. Why? I don't know. The only thing I could think of is maybe because it was mixed in with dirty dishes. And so that smell to me to this day gives me flashbacks of, I just haven't, they say your smells have memories attached to them. And that's why smells can be triggering to people, either in a good way or a bad way. If you smell, if your grandmother baked cookies when you were a kid and you smell them as an adult, they bring you back to your childhood and it was such a great time. For me, there's certain things like dish Dawn detergent that when I smell it, it just brings me back to a bad time. And so I still don't like it. So my third pregnancy, I was very sick the whole time. And she ended up weighing 7 pounds, and I could not believe it. When they told me she weighed 7 pounds, I just couldn't believe it. And they even checked. They weighed something that it had the weight on it. I think like some cans of food. They have like at the bottom 16-ounce can or whatever. And so they weighed it and they're like, yeah, it's right. See, she weighs 7 pounds. And that's all I wanted, because I remembered with my first and even my second, the first thing people would say when they saw them was, oh, she's so skinny. And that just broke my heart because I tried so hard to eat and it just didn't really do anything. And I know with my third, that's when Princess Kate Middleton. Is that her name?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I know
Middle,
her name
yeah.
is Princess Kate. Um, she had been all over the news for being hospitalized for hyperemesis gravidarum. And that's when even I was like, this is what I had. I would speak to people and say, oh, I'm so nauseous. And they'd say, oh, you must have hyperemesis gravidarum. Sounds like hyperemesis. And that word, that phrase, hyperemesis gravidarum, was finally talked about and people recognized what that meant, in like the mom groups that I had, and I got some support there. And so another woman told me, you need to go to the hospital. They can give you an IV. And no one had ever told me that. I didn't know I could do that because in those previous pregnancies, I was told, oh, this is normal, get over it, you'll be fine. And she actually had a Zofran pump. And she told me, you need to talk to your doctor, try to get a Zofran pump. So I did try, but that I was having a home birth. And by the time I found that information out, I was towards like the last month or at least last semester. And she told me, so basically, my midwife had explained to me, if you get the Zofran pump, you're going to be considered high risk. And since you're so late on in the pregnancy, she suggested that I try other remedies besides the Zofran pump. But I'm telling you, if she would have told me I could still have the home birth that I wanted and get the Zofran pump, I would have done it in a heartbeat. My heart was set on that Zofran pump because I was so miserable from the nausea and the vomiting.
If you're battling hyperemesis gravidarum, you might have heard about the Zofran pump. It's a treatment designed to help manage severe nausea and vomiting. The pump delivers Zofran, an anti-nausea medication, directly into your body through a small needle placed under your skin, kind of like an insulin pump for diabetics. This method can be more effective than pills because it provides a steady dose of medication throughout the day, helping to keep your symptoms under control. Many women find it a game changer when nothing else works. And the good news is, in most cases, you can get Zofran pump covered through your health insurance. So if you're struggling with HG, it's definitely worth asking your doctor if this treatment could work for you. You don't have to suffer without options. There's help out there, and I highly encourage you to seek out that help. Now let's get back to the pod and hear more about Blake's story.
So I did start going to the hospital, and they would give me an IV and then send me home. And like a lot of women, it's very expensive, and you're there like almost all day. You're just waiting, and that was in itself was miserable, being in a hospital like that, and then having to leave all my other kids behind, find someone to watch them. So I go to the hospital just to get an IV. So it didn't happen very often. And I'm sure having hyperemesis, you're exhausted. I mean, you don't want to get out of bed really.
Yeah.
Much less get dressed, drive to the hospital. It's just so depleting, the whole thing. And so that's how that pregnancy went. I was so glad to have her. I actually encapsulated my placenta with her, and my nausea did not go away as quickly as it did with the first two. And now later, all these years later, I think maybe me encapsulating the placenta, since maybe the placenta is what is producing these hormones, maybe that wasn't a good idea. So with this past birth that I gave in August of 2024, I didn't encapsulate the placenta this time, and it took about a week for me to get back to where I normally was. So who knows? A lot of people say that's not what caused that to linger so long, but who knows? So this last pregnancy, it's 2024. It's been almost 10 years since my last baby. And I just knew that things were going to be so different. Things have changed so much. I was actually excited, and I was naive to think that it wouldn't be the same because technology and information and the research has had to have made such a huge, drastic change since then. Boy, was I wrong in some ways. So as soon as I got pregnant, I started feeling bad. Just like the other ones. I remember we went to New Orleans and we had all these plans to go eat at all these places and go do all this fun stuff. And I had just found out I was pregnant. So I was maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks. It wasn't very far along. And I told my husband, I can't. I just can't. And he asked me what's wrong, and I was nauseous, but it was like a debilitating, exhausting nauseous. I just felt gross and I felt icky. I don't know any other way to describe it other than it's like a dark cloud that hovers over you. That's the only way I can describe it. If you've been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't been there, it's like getting a stomach virus. It's like the beginning of a stomach virus is probably how it was in the beginning. And so we didn't get to do what we thought we were going to do there. And then I got a doctor, and as soon as I called, they're like, "Oh, well, we don't see patients until you're like 14 weeks at the earliest." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it to 14 weeks." So I get in the hyperemesis gravidarum group, and they say, "Oh no, you need to call back and tell them you have hyperemesis gravidarum and you need to be seen sooner." So that's exactly what I did. And thank God for that group, because they have so much information that you just don't think of. And so I told the doctor, and so I think she wrote some prescriptions for Zofran. And I was losing weight. My husband was so concerned for me. He was like, "There's nothing y'all can do. There's nothing to be done." And we were over some holiday break, and he called the doctor for me, and it may have been over a weekend, but I thought it was over break. And he said, "She's very sick. I don't like, this is really bad." And he said, "I I have to do something. Something's got to be done." And the triage nurse that answered, because the offices were closed, said, "Well, then take her to the hospital." And so that's what my husband did. My husband had to physically pick me up, put me in the car, and take me. And we get to the hospital, and they give me fluids, and that was it. Sent me home. And my husband his jaw was on the floor. He was so surprised and confused. He could not believe that that's all they could do for me.
Unfortunately, we still don't exactly know what causes hyperemesis gravidarum, which means there's no universal treatment that works for everyone. Some women find relief with medication, others rely on IV fluids, and sadly, some don't have access to either. But one thing we do know is how dangerous dehydration can be, for both you and your baby. Dehydration can lead to complications like vaginal bleedings, preterm labor, and even make your nausea worse. While it is true that the ER often just provides IV fluids and sometimes medication, I want to encourage you. Don't hesitate to go if you're feeling dehydrated. If you've gone 24 hours without keeping fluids down, that's a sign to seek help. Getting rehydrated is so important, and it's better to be safe than sorry.
And I had mentioned to him, "Hey, there's a Zofran pump. Maybe I can talk to them about that." So I did talk to them about that, and they said, "Nope, that's all through your doctor. We can't do that kind of stuff. That's something you need to talk to your doctor about." And so we left, And we did talk to my doctor about it, and she shut it down real quick. She was like, no, that's for extreme cases. And my husband was like, she's lost 20 pounds. How is this not an extreme case? And she's like, the insurance won't cover it. And I'm throwing up in her office. I have one of those Nemesis bags, and I'm throwing up, and I'm like, this is bad. We got to do something. And so she just writes me and she tells me to double up on the Zofran that she prescribed. Well, little does she know I was already doubling up on that. And she wrote me another prescription for another nausea medicine. And I'm here to tell you, those nausea medicines don't always work for everyone. For me, it didn't seem like they did anything, not to mention how nasty they tasted. That alone made me throw up. But I know they didn't work because when I would take them, sometimes 5 minutes later I'd be throwing up. So if they worked, and I took them like I was asked to and I was supposed to, but if they worked, why was I still throwing up? And I did end up going back to the hospital. They gave me, and I will say my experience getting an IV and getting fluids that way always helped. I always felt like $1,000,000, maybe not really $1,000,000, but I would say 50% better than when I came in to the hospital. And so I would go on the hyperemesis gravidarum group and I would say, like, how are y'all getting PICC lines? How are y'all getting IVs? And they would say, oh, I just talked to my doctor and my doctor got it set up. And my husband and I discussed it, and he was like, you need IVs. And I was like, I know I do. We got to figure this out. And nothing. My doctor was like, no, I've never heard of that. We don't do that. That's not something that I can do for you. But so then I started looking into doing like those mobile IVs. They used to be for people that would have hangovers. They would go to these IV stations and it would help them out. And so I was like, I want to try to do that. Little did we know how expensive it was. It was anywhere from like $300 to $500 every time. And for me to do that once a day, that'd be $500 a week. Not to mention how much we were paying. It was so expensive to have my son, just the regular OB visits. And I did go back a couple more times to the hospital. And one time that I went to the hospital, they gave me some type of steroid through the IV. He said that he had called another doctor that he knew that had dealt with a lot of HG cases, and he recommended this one steroid type medicine. And he said, I'm going to give you that because it's been proven to really help. And I wish I would have had the energy to figure out what it was, because it did help. And I remember as soon as we left the hospital, my husband was like, are you hungry? Do you think you could eat anything? And I was like, yes, let's go eat something because I feel okay. And that's probably the most I ate the whole pregnancy, because something about going to the hospital, getting IVs, getting even the Zofran through IV was more beneficial to me than taking it orally. And I know I'm not the only one, because I read that all the time in the group. And it's so sad to me that, I mean, we're not asking for crack. We're not asking for drugs. We're asking for IVs. I really don't understand why that is so controversial or so terrible to ask for, and why we can't just get it. It seems like my life quality would have been so much different had I had the fluids through IVs when I couldn't drink water. And that group, that HG group, really got me through that whole pregnancy. 9 months is almost a year. 9 months doesn't seem like a long time when you're not the one having to deal with it, but my husband's, my kids, they all suffered with me through that because I had to neglect their needs for my own needs. And sometimes my needs were just sitting down on the couch or sitting down and taking a break or not going to my daughter's volleyball games and not being there for my husband when he needed me. And I never did get, a PICC line or a Zofran pump like I wanted. But I survived and I made it. My son ended up weighing 8 pounds, 8 pounds, 3 ounces to be exact. And thankfully he's okay, but not everybody is so fortunate like I was. And I just feel for the women that are dealing with it right now. I think about it all the time. Every time I do something, like we went to Colorado for over Christmas break, and I remember thinking, I don't know if I would have been able to do this if I had HG. What would I be doing right now if I had HG? I constantly ask myself that.
Well, first of all, I'm blown away that you had 4 HG pregnancies, and hearing, that medication didn't work, hearing that in your first 2 pregnancies, like, you didn't get any support from doctors, no understanding, apparently had also a very challenging family dynamic and, lack of support there. Um, I'm so impressed, I don't even know how you survived those 2 pregnancies, to be honest.
Me neither.
Um, yeah, it's crazy, and it really shows how strong you are. Um, and I'm so grateful that you're on this podcast and that you're sharing your story, because I feel like so many women, like, they need to hear this. I feel like you talked about so many things that I could relate to, and my pregnancy was last year, right? So I feel like you said, I feel like in 2024 we would assume, right, that things are better. Um, but I had the same issues. I was begging for IV fluids and I didn't get them. Like, I would only get one going to the hospital, paying $15,000 and then sitting there
Yes.
all day long. Yeah. Um,
And when you go all day long, you have to put your whole life on
yeah.
pause and wait all day. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so really, like, I'm so impressed that how you did that 4 times. And
It took a toll on my family life. It's not, I mean, it's easier now to forget what I went through and what my family went through back then.
yeah,
But I mean, it took a really bad toll on my first marriage,
yeah.
because I had 3 back to back to back, and it's taken a toll on my marriage this time. It's not easy.
Hyperemesis gravidarum is not just a personal struggle, it affects the whole family dynamic. For husbands and partners, it is crucial to remember that even though you can't fix the physical symptoms, your support can make a huge difference. Start with open communication. Ask how she's feeling and listen without judgment. Sometimes just being heard can ease the emotional burden. Be patient even when it feels overwhelming. This is as tough emotionally as it is physically. And take on as much as you can at home. Cook meals, clean, or care for the other kids if you have them. Small actions like bringing her water, helping her keep track of medications, or just sitting with her during the worst moments show her that you're here for her. And for friends and family, offer practical help too. You can drop off groceries, run errands, or simply check in with a kind text. These little acts of kindness remind her that she's not alone in this battle, and believe me, when you have HG, you feel so lonely and misunderstood. HG is a challenge no one should face alone. Your care and support can make this incredibly hard journey just a little bit easier.
And I did forget to mention, I took Benadryl. So they drill into your head, oh, you need to take Unisom and B6.
Yep.
And so I took B6 and Benadryl. I ended up taking that because I had this disgusting, terrible postnasal drip. And so I asked the doctor, can I take Benadryl? And they said, well, yeah, but don't take the Unisom if you're going to take the Benadryl. And so that did help me.
Mhm.
For anyone that is going through that, Benadryl max dose. I took as many as I could 24/7. And when I started taking that, I did see a difference. Not a cure, but it helped. And then something I didn't know to ask about, which I probably would have been denied anyway, but prednisone. A lot of women are mentioning prednisone helped a lot in their HG pregnancies, and that's not something I even knew about to ask. But if I did, I probably would have asked about it and maybe tried it.
Yeah, I
Um,
never heard about that. So that's really good advice. Like I'll put all of that in the show notes of the pod. So anybody who's listening can kind of just find all those resources
yeah,
mentioned.
prednisone is a steroid,
Yeah.
and I don't know that all doctors will do it or are considering it or even doing it, but I have read in there that some women are getting some relief from that.
Yeah. That's great advice. If you would reflect on your journey and you had 4 HG pregnancies, I feel like you're really an expert now. Um, like I know a lot of women that have, their first baby and they have HG. Like I always read or like I hear it in conversations when I talk to them that they're so scared to have another baby. And they want a big family, they want another baby, but they're just so scared to have, hyperemesis again. Mm,
Oh yeah, it was scary. I mean, the thing is that it had been 9 years, and I think a lot of things get forgotten over a decade almost. And so in my day-to-day life, I wasn't constantly thinking about HG anymore. Before I got married, I worked, I had my own, and I had already had 3 kids. So I thought my journey of being a mom was done. I never thought I was going to have more kids. And so I assumed that HG had to have been different. And then I remember when my husband and I were talking about having babies, I told him about, well, my first 3 were, like this, but someone had told me when you have different fathers, sometimes that can affect the HG, and you might have it with a certain father but not have it with a different father. And I thought, well, maybe I won't have it because it's a different father. Plus it's been 10 years. Like, come on, it has to be different. It's going to have to be totally different because it's been 10 years. And I remember discussing that with my husband, and and I did mention that, hey, it's a possibility, this is what it might look like. And he understood, but being told about it and actually going through it really are 2 different things.
yeah.
And I mean, he was very scared, and I don't know that we're going to have more.
Yeah.
We both would like to have more, but not unless we could find a doctor that is willing to give me IVs. Because, and I guess this is a question to you, didn't you notice such a huge difference when you would get an IV?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. Like, after I left the hospital, I felt like so good. But then like it lasted like 1 or 2 days, and then I would kind of spiral back into this like vomiting, dehydrating, and just getting to that point, like you said, where I was lying in bed. I couldn't get out of bed anymore, and then we just had to go back to the ER again, more IV fluids, like more bills, and it was just crazy.
Yes, you're right. It didn't last. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as it did for you. For me, it was like a few hours.
Yeah.
So I would get out of the hospital and I'd be like, let's go eat. Hurry, we have to go eat so I can eat something. And it was still like I had nausea, but I could keep something down. And smells weren't as bad. It just, like I said, it was probably 50% better. So I still had it, but and I just wish and I hope that women, I guess what I should have done was tried to find another doctor, but it's easier said than done when you're in the middle of that. I mean, even picking up the phone, even going to the hospital was such a chore for me. It meant I had to stand up, I had to walk to the car, I had to get in the car and drive. I threw up in the car so many times, and it's easier said than done. I had a nemesis bag, which that's one of the main things you need when you have HG. You need to carry a nemesis bag. But when you're driving and you have a nemesis bag next to you, it's not so easy to grab it and throw up in it in time while you're driving and watching the road. And I live in Texas, so the speed limit's like 70, 75. And so I threw up all over myself several times just driving. So even driving was, I didn't want to drive. I really just didn't want to do anything, but I made myself, and I probably should have made myself do more. But that, again, that's easier said than done. I know I had kidney problems. I ended up getting a kidney infection because I was so dehydrated, and it was in the middle of the summer. And I didn't know I had that because I was just so miserable and so sick. It's really hard to tell when there's something else going on because you're so used to feeling bad, feeling sick, throwing up, that it's hard to identify that something else is going on. And so
Yeah.
I am 4 months postpartum now, and I can't keep up like I did before. I keep going back in the HG group and I keep asking, how long do you think it takes to get back to where you were before you were pregnant? Because before I was pregnant, I ate healthy. I worked out 3 to 5 times a week, went on walks every day with my husband and my kids, and we'd go outside and we'd do all kinds of stuff. And I just can't do that now. And I'm I'm shocked. I'm 4 months postpartum, and I thought I'd be back to where I was. Like I said, we went to Colorado, and I was so exhausted there, and I went skiing, and I just couldn't do very much like I used to. And everyone has basically said, give yourself a year, a whole year after giving birth, give yourself a year after that to get back to where you were. And I think they're right. I really thought in my head that I just had to have the baby, and once I had the baby, everything was just gonna disappear. And the nausea and the vomiting disappears, but your stamina and your endurance, it doesn't magically reappear like I had told myself it would.
Yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned, that aspect because it's like you said, I think a lot of women think, oh, I do those 9 months and then it's over, right? And then I just go back to my normal life again. Um, and I think it's much better actually to know so you can prepare, right? That even after giving birth, it will take some time for your body to recover, for you to mentally recover, I guess also for your family, and your husband and your kids to recover from how it also affected them.
Yeah.
Um, and just, knowing about that is so important. So I'm so happy that you can speak so openly about that and share that with all of us. Because I just think a lot
Yeah.
of people don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And plus you're taking care of a newborn. I'm breastfeeding, and postpartum, especially, the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 1 month, 2 month, it's very difficult for anyone. For most people, you don't get a whole lot of recovery time for yourself because you're taking care of a newborn. And when you have HG, there's another aspect of you're just surviving. And then after you have the baby, that's kind of like, I think I've heard people mention the fourth trimester. They call it the
Yeah,
fourth trimester. So that's kind of your fourth trimester of HG, is just existing without throwing up, but you're still dealing with all the HG that you had built up over that 9 months. So yeah, that's definitely a difficult period of time, even postpartum. Even though you don't have the nausea, it's still a difficult time for someone who's had HG.
absolutely. Um, if you would look back now, what kind of advice would you share with, other women who want to get pregnant, who might be scared about getting HG, or maybe who already had hyperemesis? Is there any, lessons learned, anything how you would prepare for like a future pregnancy based on all of your experience?
I would say, and I didn't follow this my own advice because I know how difficult this is, but if I could give advice, it would be find a doctor that is willing to do more than just prescribe you basic nausea medications. And what I mean is the IVs, the Zofran pump, the PICC line, the infusions, whatever they can, find a doctor that's willing to do that. I did not follow my own advice because I was so exhausted. Um, Try to get your family to understand. That's also easier said than done. But educating them, again, like we mentioned, the what was it that I said? It was a steroid,
Yeah,
prednisone,
yeah,
things like that. Um, go to the ER. If I didn't go to the ER as much as I should because it was just such a chore to go. Um, but if you have people around you that are willing to help with chores around the house, things that you need to do, take them up on that because you need to rest. You need to build up your strength if you can. But the doctor is very important. Finding a good doctor. And like I said, I didn't do that. But if you can, especially if you're preparing to have a pregnancy and you know you're probably going to have HG, that's a big one. Do
yeah,
it while you have the energy, because once you end up with HG, it's hard to find the energy to fight people.
yeah. I totally agree. I feel like I think people that never had hyperemesis, they can't even imagine how exhausting it is. Like when you were talking about just standing up, just making a phone call. I think maybe this sounds silly to like some people that have never experienced hyperemesis, but I feel like it's so true. And I feel like nobody really understands that. Like you only understand that if you really had hyperemesis.
It's
Because
like having a
yeah,
stomach virus.
yeah,
That's the only way I can describe it. And you have to imagine having a stomach virus for a week or two. Okay, it's bad in the moment, and then you kind of get over it and you move on. But if you've had a stomach virus for 9 months,
yeah,
you're going to have vitamin deficiencies and depletions and low energy and health problems. And
yeah,
on top of that, you're creating a baby, which depletes you in itself and takes from you in itself. And we worry about our babies. Everyone in that HG group is like, well, should we take this medicine? We've heard it's bad for the development of the baby. So we're not selfish. We think about other people and we think about our babies that we're creating. But I've never heard of a baby having birth defects from getting an IV.
yeah,
So I think an IV would be your best bet. Um, Something I forgot to mention is your oral health, your teeth. They want you to go to the dentist while you're pregnant, but you can't go to the dentist while you have HG. Just opening your mouth is going to make you throw up,
yeah,
and it does a lot of damage to your teeth. And I thought I did right because I would rinse my mouth out and I would brush my teeth. But I've had a lot of damage done to the enamel of my teeth, and I need a lot of work done. And I've started working on them. I'm doing some work, but I never realized. And I don't know. Maybe there's more I could have done for my teeth that I didn't do. But I do know this. I thought I was doing the right thing by rinsing my mouth out as soon as I threw up and brushing my teeth, but I don't know what I should have done differently,
Yep.
or if I could have done something differently.
Such an important aspect, that a lot of people forget about, like your oral health. And like even my experience, I feel like there's no real strategy, right? Everybody's different. Like even everybody's teeth are different and react differently. So that constant like vomiting and that acid that you have in your mouth, and it's just gross. And it's like hyperemesis. I feel like I wouldn't wish that to anybody. Like
Me
it's just
neither.
the worst. Um, and like this is so amazing. Like this interview is so powerful. I feel like there would be so many more questions that I want to ask you. But I also promised you that we would keep this below 1 hour, and I know you have, kids at home. And um, so maybe just my last question for you. And maybe, maybe we can have you back on the pod. I feel like I'm sure a lot of people that listen would have so many more questions for you.
This is
Um,
therapeutic. So yes, we should do another one later.
Definitely. Let's do that. And so just to wrap it up, is there like one last thing, like one message that you would have for like any woman with hyperemesis listening, or like friends and family listening, or maybe even doctors? Like is there anything you would want to tell those people?
It's not your fault. It's not something that you can, at least at this point, prevent. You can do everything right and you can still get it. I blamed myself a lot for things that happened in my personal life during that time. And now that it's been 10 years, I realize a lot of things happened because I had HG, not because I was lazy, not because I just didn't want to do it, but because I had HG and it's that debilitating. So I went to college. I was signed up for classes and I was doing great. I was making all A's, really high A's in all my classes. And then I got pregnant and my grades just I couldn't even make it to the school. I couldn't make it to my classes, and I blamed myself for being a terrible student, lazy. I didn't want it hard enough. I didn't want it bad enough. And I look back now and I'm like, I had HG. Of course I wasn't doing good in my classes, and all my classes were in the morning. And I just want people to think about things that didn't go right during their pregnancy. It's more than likely nothing they could have done at all, unless they just got IVs every day or had the Zofran pump and the PICC lines. Then maybe, yeah, they would have felt better and been able to do something different. But a lot of personal life situations are severely affected by HG. Working, a lot of women work during HG and their jobs are suffering, and that's not their fault. They're not lazy. They're not bad workers. They're just dealing with something that serious. That's it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Wow. Hey, thank you so much again for being here, for having the courage, to share your story. And again, like 4 hyperemesis pregnancies. Wow, that's unbelievable. Your kids have such a strong mom. Like you can
Thank
be
you.
so proud of yourself. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing what you're doing for the HG community.
Thank you for listening to the Hyperemesis Gravidarum podcast. I created this space to help women facing HG feel less alone by sharing real stories from those who've been through it. If you'd like to share your own HG journey on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us on Instagram at hyperemesis_podcast. Together, we can create more awareness about HG and support each other through this challenging experience. Take care and see you in the next episode.